the colonial borders that still divide Africa. More than 60 years after independence, Africa is still haunted by lines drawn in pencil and ink, by people who never lived there, lines that cut through kingdoms, families, and cultures, lines that turn neighbors into strangers and allies into enemies. These are Africa's colonial borders, the invisible scars that still shape its nations, its conflicts, and its identity. Today, more than 1 billion people live within boundaries that were decided in European boardrooms, not African communities. And yet, despite their origins, these borders remain, defended, contested, and increasingly questioned. Why do they still exist? And what would it take to redraw them? This is Horizon Africa, and today we're explaining Africa beyond the headlines. Let's dive straight in. To understand Africa's modern borders, we have to return to a cold winter in Berlin in 1884. 13 European powers and the United States gathered for the Berlin Conference, hosted by German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. Their mission? Divide Africa among themselves, peacefully and profitably. Not a single African was invited. Within months, they had drawn new borders across the map, straight lines that ignored languages, trade routes, and centuries of migration. The Niger River became a boundary. The Sahara became a wall. Entire ethnic groups were split across colonies. What they saw as efficient cartography was, in truth, geopolitical vandalism. By 1914, 90% of Africa was under European control, divided between Britain, France, Belgium, Portugal, Germany, Spain, and Italy. To the colonizers, these lines represented power. To Africans, they represented division, and a future they never chose. When independence came in the mid-20th century, the new African states faced a dilemma. Should they erase these colonial borders and redraw them according to culture and history? Or should they keep them to avoid chaos and conflict? In 1964, the Organization of African Unity, the forerunner of today's African Union, made a landmark decision. They agreed to respect colonial borders as they were. The goal was stability. Redrawing the map, they feared, could unleash endless wars. It was a decision rooted in pragmatism, but also one that cemented colonial lines as permanent fixtures of modern Africa. And the consequences of that decision are still unfolding today. Across the continent, those arbitrary lines continue to shape some of Africa's most enduring conflicts. In the Horn of Africa, Ethiopia and Eritrea fought a brutal war from 1998 to 2000 over a border drawn by Italy nearly a century earlier. Tens of thousands died over a line that meant little to the communities who lived there. In Sudan, borders drawn by the British ignored cultural and religious realities, lumping the Arab North and the African South into one nation. That experiment collapsed in 2011, when South Sudan gained independence, after one of the longest and bloodiest civil wars in modern history. In Nigeria, the British merged hundreds of ethnic groups, including the Hausa Fulani in the north, the Yoruba in the west, and the Igbo in the east, into one colony. The result was a fragile federation that erupted into the Biafran War in the 1960s. Even today, regional tensions persist, proof that these lines didn't unite, they simply contained. And in the Sahel, borders between Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso slice across the same ethnic groups, creating gray zones where no state has real control, leaving space for insurgents and militias to thrive. Each of these conflicts carries the fingerprints of colonial mapmakers. For ordinary Africans, these borders are not just lines on a map. They're barriers that shape daily life. Families separated by invisible frontiers. Nomadic communities forced to choose citizenship. Traders who need passports to cross markets that have existed for centuries. A farmer in northern Ghana might speak the same language as his cousin in Burkina Faso, yet they live under different laws, currencies, and governments. In East Africa, the Maasai people were split between Kenya and Tanzania, one nation divided into two. Their traditional grazing lands turned into international borders they never asked for. These are the quiet consequences of the colonial map, less visible than war, but equally powerful. Borders that made nations but broke communities. So, if these borders cause so much tension, why haven't they changed? The simple answer is fear. Fear that redrawing them could unravel the fragile stability of post-colonial states. Fear that opening the question of borders could reignite ethnic or regional conflicts. Even when countries have split peacefully, like Sudan and South Sudan, new border disputes have followed immediately after. And yet, despite their artificial nature, these boundaries have taken on new meanings over time. They've become symbols of sovereignty, pride, and identity for generations born long after independence. For many Africans, their colonial nation is still home. Reimagining Africa's borders, therefore, isn't just about lines, it's about rewriting belonging. Rather than erasing borders, Africa has tried to transcend them. The vision of Pan-Africanism, championed by leaders like Kwame Nkrumah, Julius Nyerere, and Haile Selassie, sought unity beyond colonial boundaries. They believed that only a united Africa could overcome the divisions imposed by Europe. While a single continental government never materialized, the dream survived. In regional blocs like ECOWAS in West Africa, SADC in the south, and EAC in the east. Today, the African Continental Free Trade Area, or AFCFTA, represents a modern step toward that unity, linking over 1.4 billion people into one vast market. It doesn't erase borders, but it makes them less relevant. If trade, travel, and ideas can flow freely, those colonial lines start to lose their power. That's the quiet revolution of the 21st century. Integration, not fragmentation. Still, the tension between sovereignty and solidarity runs deep. Many African governments defend borders as sacred, even as they talk of unity. They fear that letting regions go could inspire secession movements in their own backyards. And they're not entirely wrong. From Somaliland to Biafra, Cabinda to Ambazonia, groups across Africa still dream of self-rule, believing colonial borders trap them in nations they never chose. These movements expose an uncomfortable truth. The post-colonial map may have frozen conflicts, but it never truly resolved them. Each line tells a story of compromise, between peace and justice, between unity and difference. Despite these challenges, Africa is not standing still. Across the continent, borders are being softened by people, technology, and trade. Mobile phones, digital finance, and social media are connecting citizens across nations faster than any treaty. Kenyan music trends in Nigeria. Ghanaian entrepreneurs collaborate with South Africans. Diaspora communities link cities like London, Lagos, and Nairobi in real time. The younger generation doesn't see Africa as 54 separate countries, but as a single dynamic space. And maybe that's the most powerful form of integration, not imposed by governments but created by people. What if Africa did decide to redraw its map? It's a question that invites both hope and danger. Hope that nations could finally align with cultures and realities. Danger that the process could unleash chaos. The truth is, no one really knows what a reimagined Africa would look like. Would the Yoruba have their own nation? Would Tuareg regions span across Mali, Niger, and Algeria? Would southern Cameroon and western Nigeria reunite? Such ideas sound radical, yet they also force a deeper reflection. Is the current map truly African, or is it still colonial at its core? Perhaps the goal isn't to erase the map, but to Africanize it. To redefine borders not as barriers, but as bridges. History offers clues about what's possible. After independence, Tanzania and Zanzibar united to form one country. Eritrea gained independence peacefully from Ethiopia after decades of struggle. And South Sudan achieved statehood through a referendum, though peace has remained elusive. These examples show that borders can change, but always at a cost. That's why most African leaders prefer evolution over revolution, slow integration rather than sudden fragmentation. And perhaps, after a century of imposed lines, slow and steady is the wiser path. More than 100 years after the Berlin Conference, Africa's borders still tell a story, not just of division, but of resilience. They remind us how outsiders once shaped the continent, but they also reveal how Africans continue to reshape it in their own image. The map of Africa may be colonial in origin, but the future of Africa will not be. A future where borders still exist, but means something entirely different. Not walls of separation, but networks of connection. Because the next generation is already building an Africa that doesn't stop at the border. This was Horizon Africa, explaining Africa beyond the headlines. If you found this story insightful, subscribe and join us as we explore the continent's most important forces, its politics, its people, its economy, and its future. So was the Organization of African Unity right in maintaining the colonial maps that still divide the continent? Let us know in the comments section. Next up, the coup epidemic. Why Africa's democracies are falling apart. Subscribe to Horizon Africa for more context, more clarity, and more truth. Thanks for watching.